Hey, in this video I will show you how BPM works, how to count time signatures including a few odd ones, and how to work with different notes such as triplets. Because when you start writing songs, you might think that you're not going to need this stuff until year 2 or 3 of writing songs, but time signatures like 3/4 or using triplets is something that could happen on accident. For example, I didn't notice that the riff for my song You Did It was actually a triplet rhythm until I had to program the drums. Or the intro riff for my song Springtrap is actually in 5/4, and I didn't even realize it at first. So, if something similar happens to you, it will be very useful to know how to change the MIDI grid or how to adjust the time signature of your song. A quick heads up though, if you just want to know how to change these settings, skip to this timestamp right here. Because before we get into how to change this stuff, we first need to figure out how it even works. So, let's start with the tempo, which we should all know is measured in beats per minute, short BPM. The BPM dictates how fast the song is, by counting how many beats are going to be played in a minute. If we play 60 beats per minute, for example, there's going to be a beat every second. If we double that and go to 120 BPM, it's going to play 2 beats each second. Now, you might notice that we come back to beat 1 every 4 ticks. But that doesn't really matter because we're not counting the bars, we're counting each individual beat inside the bar. This will make sure that even at a different time signature, the speed stays consistent. But speaking of time signatures, let's talk about those. So far we've been counting in 4 groups of quarter notes. In this case, the top number refers to how many beats we count, while the bottom number dictates whether those are half notes, quarter notes, or eighth notes, and so on. To make this easier to understand, you can think of it this way. 4/4 is normal tempo, 4/2 is half time, and 4/8 is double time. What is a little bit confusing about this is the fact that despite counting faster, the BPM will stay the same. So the BPM is fixed to the tempo of quarter notes, basically. But to keep it simple, let's stick with quarter notes for now. The most important part of a time signature is the top number, because it tells us how many beats we are supposed to count. For example, I think we're all familiar with 4/4, because for most songs we can count to 4. So let's change it to 3/4. The BPM is still the same, so we would count at the same speed, but this time we would only count to 3, which would sound like this. Let's try something else. Now we do 5/4. Again, BPM is the same, which means we count at the same speed, but this time we count to 5. I think you're starting to understand. The BPM tells you how fast to count, and the top number of the time signature tells you what to count to. So let's look into the bottom number again. I'll give you an example with the same riff we just heard, but this time with a drum beat on top of it, to make it easier to understand. What you're hearing here is 5/4, right? Well, personally, I would say that depends on the tempo of the rest of the song. If the rest of the song was just as fast as the intro riff, then I'd say yes, keep it at 5/4. However, if the rest of the song was noticeably slower, I'd probably notate our riff as 5/8. Notice, we didn't play the riff itself faster, but because the tempo of the song is half of what we would count the riff, I went with eighth notes to bring the beats up to speed. So, let's do the opposite. Let's assume the tempo of the song was closer to 200 BPM. In this case, I would notate our riff as half notes. Again, the speed of the riff didn't change, but in context of the rest of the song, it sounds like halftime, which is why I went with half notes instead of our usual quarter notes. I hope that made sense, at least to some degree, because now let's continue with triplet rhythms and their time signature counterparts. To keep things simple, let's start with 4/4 and add 4 notes. The easiest way to introduce triplets would be to use an eighth note triplet for every quarter note. The way we would count that would be 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... But there's of course a quarter note triplet as well. that would sound like this. In metal, you can sometimes spot those back to back. Take this riff, for example. First, we have the 8th note triplet and then the quarter note triplet. However, sometimes you will find songs that use this triplet rhythm throughout the entire track. Take Laid to Rest by Lamb of God as an example. You could count the song in 4/4, but for every beat we would have a triplet.
The blood's on the wall, so you might as well just admit it.
However, triplets doesn't always have to mean 3 notes. For example, if we take out the 2nd note in this triplet, we get this stop and go kind of rhythm. This is heavily used in rock and blues. Check out my song You Did It, for example.
You've got the hardest parts behind you.
I'm always playing groups of 2 notes, but of course within a triplet. And there's many more examples where the song is in regular 4/4, but with a triplet rhythm. However, if you were to write notations for a song like this, it would obviously be full of triplets, which might be a bit hard to read, but most of all a pain in the butt to write down. This is where 3/4, 6/8 and occasionally 12/8 comes in handy. So, let's look at these time signatures. 3/4 is commonly known as a waltz rhythm, but of course it's also used in many other genres. Here's a few examples. Now, if we speed things up, we'll get into the 6/8 and 12/8 territory. Those are pretty much the same with the exception that 12/8 is twice as long as 6/8. So, 6/8 you would count, and 12/8 you would obviously count twice as long. But now, let's go back to our earlier example. Laid to Rest, instead of being 4/4,
The blood's on the wall, so you might as well just
can also be counted in 6/8.
bleach out the stains, commit to forgetting it.
And the same thing applies to You Did It.
You did it, you reached the end. Do you remember the time we spent?
Fact is, we can turn this around. The 3/4 songs can also be counted as 4/4 triplets. And because they're so slow, you could actually say they are in 2/4 as well. So, how should you go forward? Are these songs in 3/4 and 6/8? Or are they in 4/4 triplets? Well, the answer is that there is no right or wrong answer here, and whatever feels right to you will be the best thing for you. So, now that you know what these things do, let us try to figure out some time signatures. We'll start with a hard one, 5/8 at 60 BPM. What I would recommend is always start with just counting the tempo. We have 60 beats per minute, and remember what also has 60 beats per minute? Seconds in a minute. So, let's start counting seconds. Now that we have the tempo down, we should take a look at the bottom number. The bottom number tells us to count in 1/8 notes, which would be twice as fast as the quarter notes that we have been counting so far. So, for every second, we will count 2 beats from now on. But now, let's look at the top number, because we're not supposed to count to 4, we're actually supposed to count in 5. So it would be... And that is our time signature right there. Let's move on to the next one, which will be 7/4 at 150 BPM. Right off the bat, I don't know off the top of my head how fast 150 BPM is supposed to be. So I'll just bring up a metronome real quick. Alright, that is our speed. The bottom number of our time signature tells us we're counting quarter notes, which makes it easy for us because we neither have to speed up or slow down. So this is our tempo. However, the top number tells us we're counting to 7, so let's do that. And boom, that is our time signature right there. Lastly, let's try 4/4 at 130 BPM with a triplet rhythm. Again, first start with counting 130 BPM, which is around this speed. And then look at the bottom number. It tells us we're staying with quarter notes, so we can just skip this part and look at the top number instead, which is 4. So we just count to 4. And that is our time signature. Now let's add the triplets. And now if we were to play a snare in a triplet rhythm for every quarter note, it would sound a little bit like this. I might make a video about all the different notes in the future and all the different time signatures, so we can go a little bit more in depth. But I hope these explanations were at least somewhat helpful, and we can now move on to how to change speed, time signature, and triplet rhythms inside of FL Studio. So the first thing we want to do is change the time signature, because this first riff is, in fact, not 4/4. Yeah, that riff does not come in on beat 1. So we will have to change the time signature to 7/8. That's the time signature I chose for this riff. However, I would recommend not changing the project's time settings. If we go in here and set it to 7/8, it's going to change the complete speed and time signature of the project, and it's going to sound really weird. Same thing would happen if we used a time division, like this. So that just screws everything up. So I would recommend just leaving the project settings as 4/4. And then what we'll do instead is go up here on your playlist, go to time markers and add a time signature change here. Because now if we pick 7/8, everything in the project is going to stay the same, but the metronome is going to count properly. And now the riff starts on beat 1, as it should. Now, as you can see, this drum pattern is still all the way over here. That's because it's still set to 4/4. Every kick on beat 1 is a little bit off-grid. So to change the time signature in patterns, we just go to time markers down here as well. And at the time signature change 7/8. Or whatever your riff is, of course. And boom, once we change that, every kick is on beat 1, as it should be. And now this pattern aligns perfectly with this next pattern, which is in 4/4, as you can hear. So we need to change the time signature here as well. So we go to time markers and boom, 4/4. Oh, that's a little bit off grid. It should be here. So now it sounds like this. And as you can tell, it's counting much slower. That's because we're counting quarter notes now instead of the eighth notes from earlier. So the next thing we want to take a look at is triplets. Because I want the double bass to copy whatever the guitar is doing right here. And since it's playing triplets, I'll need to do the drums as triplets as well. The way we do that is we click on this little magnet up here. And then here we can go 1/3 beat or 1/6. And that's where we can do the triplets. I'll just cut that right there. And now we have the triplets. So those are quarter note triplets, and over here we have half note triplets. And the way we do those is we just do the triplets here as well, but do them 2 grid steps long. And yeah, that's how you do triplets. Next up, we have a speed change. And as you can tell, the drums do not align at all. So what we want to do first is we are going to make sure that all of these are set to either Stretch or Stretch Pro. I think Stretch usually sounds the best, so we'll put them all to Stretch. And before we do it to this clip, we want to change the tempo. I know that this was recorded at 160 BPM, so we're going to put this to 160. As you can see, it now stretched out like this, and it should align with the drums now. Yes. And now we can stretch this. However, this first part is now going to be way faster. We do not want that. So in this case, we're going to go back to 130. Then we're going to select a little part of this like that. And now we can right click on here, create an automation clip. Then we copy this value, make like a little dot in here. And then we want to go to 160, copy that value, not volume, and then paste that up here and here as well. So it stays at 160 BPM. Now we just right click here again and make sure that it starts the song in this position. And now we should have our speed change. If you wanted to gradually get slow or faster, you just delete this, or not put it there at all, and then you have like a little bit of a ramp up to that speed. We could even make it a little bit longer like this. And yeah, that's how you change the time signature, do triplets, and change the tempo during the song. I hope this helped, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye!
Finally we meet again. In the darkness of the sound. Baby, into my madness. Offering you final contract. This is but a taste.